The throne room of the Zari Empire had never felt so empty, and Queen Velara stood alone before the massive window that looked out into the endless darkness of space. Her hands pressed against the cold glass as she watched distant stars burn in silence. Her skin, which should have glowed with the brilliant violet light of her royal bloodline, had grown dim over the past 3 years, and the servants whispered that their queen was fading from the inside out. That grief had stolen the light from her very soul. 3 years had passed since that terrible day when the Cathari slavers had attacked the diplomatic convoy. And 3 years had passed since they had taken her youngest daughter, Lyris, away into the darkness between stars. Velara closed her eyes and remembered the last time she had seen her child. A bright and curious girl of only 12 cycles who had begged to join the diplomatic mission because she wanted to see the crystal gardens of the Narathi homeworld. "Please, mother," Lyris had said with that smile that could melt even the coldest heart. "I promise I will behave and make you proud." And Velara had said yes, because how could any mother refuse such innocent joy? And that decision haunted her every single night since the attack had been swift and brutal. And the Cathari had known exactly which ship carried the princess, which meant someone had betrayed them. Someone had sold her daughter to the slavers for credits or power or some other worthless thing. Every rescue mission had failed. And the Sari fleets had searched 1,000 systems without finding any trace of Lyris. And the Galactic Council had eventually declared the princess legally dead after 2 years of silence. But Velara refused to hold a funeral because a mother knows when her child is gone. And something deep in her heart told her that Lyris was still alive somewhere in the vast universe, suffering and waiting and hoping that someone would come for her. "Your Majesty," a voice called from behind her. And Velara turned to see her chief advisor Korath standing at the entrance to the throne room with his head bowed in respect. "What is it, Korath?" she asked, and her voice sounded tired even to her own ears. "The council requests your presence to discuss the succession matter," Korath said carefully. And Velara felt anger rise in her chest because she knew what they wanted. They wanted her to name her elder daughter, Cirrus, as the official heir, which would mean officially accepting that Lyris was never coming home. And Velara could not bring herself to do that even after 3 years of silence. "Tell them I will consider it," she said, turning back to the window. "Your Majesty, with respect." "You have been saying that for many months now," Korath replied. "The Empire needs stability, and the people need to know that the throne is secure. The people need hope." Velara snapped back. "And I will not take that from them or from myself." Korath sighed, but bowed again and left the room. And Velara was alone once more with her grief and her memories and the cold light of distant stars. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, a small human frigate called the Defiant drifted through uncharted space with its hull covered in scorch marks and its engines running on emergency power inside the ship. Sergeant Marcus Cole sat in the command chair and stared at the navigation display that showed nothing but empty void in every direction. And he wondered if this would finally be the day when their luck ran out. 18 months they had been lost behind enemy lines. And 18 months they had survived by scavenging and hiding and fighting when they had no other choice. His squad had started with 15 soldiers. And they still had 15 soldiers because Marcus refused to leave anyone behind, no matter how bad things got. "Sarge, the fuel cells are down to 12%. Private Rodriguez reported from the engineering station. A voice calm despite the bad news, because they had all learned to stay calm in impossible situations. "And the food supplies?" Marcus asked. 3 days. "Maybe 4 if we cut rations again," Rodriguez answered. Marcus nodded and looked around the bridge at his people. At Chun and Okonkwo and Williams and all the others who had trusted him to bring them home alive. They were dirty and tired and scared. But they were still fighting, still hoping. still refusing to give up even when the universe seemed determined to crush them. "There has to be something out here," Marcus said, pulling up the long-range sensors. "Space stations, settlements, something where we can resupply." The sensors flickered and showed mostly static. But then a small blip appeared at the edge of detection range, and Marcus leaned forward with sudden interest. "What is that?" he asked. John worked the controls and frowned at the readings before answering. "Some kind of station, massive structure built into an asteroid. But the energy signatures are strange." "Strange how?" Marcus pressed. "Multiple ships docked. Lots of life signs from dozens of different species. Heavy weapons platforms," Chan listed off. "But no official transponder signal and no identification beacon." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine because he knew what that meant. And he had heard stories about places like this during his training. "Black market station," he said quietly. "Probably pirates or slavers, or worse, we should go around it," Corporal Okonkwo suggested. "Find somewhere else to resupply." "With 12% fuel," Rodriguez countered. "We will be dead in space before we find anything else." The bridge fell silent as everyone understood the situation they were in. And Marcus weighed the options in his mind, even though he already knew what he had to do. "We go in quiet," he decided. "Dock on the far side, find what we need, and get out before anyone knows we were there. And if things go wrong?" Williams asked. Marcus checked his rifle and made sure it was ready for action before answering. "Then we do what we always do, and we adapt and survive." The Defiant changed course toward the distant station, its battered hull reflecting the cold light of stars as it carried 15 lost soldiers toward a place of nightmares. None of them knew that this decision would change the fate of empires. And none of them knew that a young alien princess was waiting in the darkness below, holding on to hope with broken fingers and a spirit that refused to die. Queen Velara stood in her throne room and prayed to gods she was not sure existed, asking them to protect her daughter wherever she might be. And somewhere in the black between stars, the universe began to answer. The station called Vertex was built into the heart of a dead asteroid, and as the Defiant approached, Marcus could see the scars of ancient mining operations covering its surface. Like wounds that had never healed, dozens of ships were docked along the outer rings, and most of them were armed vessels with weapons that made the human frigate look like a toy in comparison. "Keep it slow and steady," Marcus ordered as Chun guided them toward an empty docking port on the far side of the station. "No sudden moves and no unnecessary communications." The ship shuddered as the docking clamps locked into place, and for a long moment, everyone held their breath, waiting for alarms or weapons fire or guards demanding to know their business. Nothing happened, and Marcus allowed himself to relax just a little bit. "Rodriguez, you and Williams stay with the ship and keep the engines warm," he commanded. "Everyone else, we are going shopping." The airlock opened with a hiss, and Marcus led his squad into the station with their weapons hidden under loose jackets and their eyes, scanning every shadow for threats. The outer corridors of Vertex looked almost normal, with merchants selling spare parts and food vendors cooking strange meats over open flames. And Marcus started to think that maybe this place was not as bad as he had feared. Then they went deeper, and everything changed. The first thing Marcus noticed was the smell. A terrible mixture of fear and waste and suffering that no amount of air recycling could hide. And then he saw the cages. Row after row of metal cages lined the walls of a massive central chamber. And inside those cages were people. Dozens of species from across the galaxy, locked up like animals waiting to be sold. Marcus felt his stomach turn as he saw a family of small, furry creatures huddled together in one cage. And in another, an old man with blue skin who stared at nothing with dead eyes. "Slavers," Okonkwo whispered with disgust thick in his voice. "This whole station is a slave market. We should leave," Chan said quietly. This is not our fight, Sarge. We need to focus on getting home. Marcus knew. Chun was right, because they were 15 soldiers with limited ammunition and a damaged ship. And there was nothing they could do against an entire station full of criminals and slavers. But then he heard a voice, young and defiant and speaking in broken common tongue. And the words made him stop in his tracks. I am Lyris of the Sari, and I will not kneel to you. The sound came from the lowest level of the slave pits, and Marcus moved toward it without thinking, pushing through crowds of buyers and sellers who barely noticed him. He found the cage in a dark corner where the worst prisoners were kept, the ones who refused to be broken. The ones who were too much trouble to sell. Inside the cage was a young alien girl with pale, violet skin that should have been glowing but had gone dull and gray. And her body was covered with scars from beatings. And her wrists were raw from chains. A Cathari guard stood in front of the cage with a shock stick in his hand. And he was laughing at the girl who had just spat in his face. Stupid creature, the guard snarled. 3 years we have had you, and still you do not learn your place. But do not worry, because today we will sell you to the fighting pits where they will teach you proper respect. The girl, Lyris, lifted her head and stared at the guard with eyes that burned with hatred and hope, and something that Marcus recognized immediately. It was the same look he saw in his own soldiers every day. The look of someone who refused to surrender no matter how bad things got. My mother will come for me, Lyris said. And her voice cracked but did not break. And when she does, your entire species will pay for what you have done. The guard laughed again and raised a shock stick. But before he could strike, Marcus stepped forward and grabbed his wrist with a grip like iron. That is enough, Marcus said calmly. The guard turned with surprise and anger on his ugly face. And he tried to pull away, but Marcus held firm. Who do you think you are, human? The guard demanded. This is my merchandise, and you have no right to interfere. I am a customer, Marcus replied. And I want to buy this one. The guard's eyes narrowed with suspicion because humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. And most of them were too poor to buy anything in a place like Vothex. She is not for sale, the guard said. Too much trouble. She's going to the fighting pits. Everything has a price, Marcus countered. Name yours. Lyris was watching this exchange with confusion, because she did not understand why a human would want to buy her. And she did not dare to hope that this was anything other than another cool trick. The guard thought about it and then smiled with greed in his eyes. 10,000 credits, and she is yours. Marcus did not have 10,000 credits. And he did not have any credits at all. But he smiled back and nodded as if the price was nothing. Deal, he said. But first I need to inspect the merchandise. Open the cage. The guard hesitated but then shrugged and pulled out a key card to unlock the cage door. And the moment it swung open, Marcus moved with the speed that had earned him his sergeant stripes in a dozen combat zones. His fist connected with the guard's throat before the alien could react. And the shock stick fell from nerveless fingers as the guard collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Marcus caught him before he hit the floor and dragged him into the cage. Then he knelt down in front of Lyris and spoke softly. My name is Marcus Cole. I am a sergeant in the Terran Alliance military, and I am going to get you out of here. Lyris stared at him with wide eyes that were filling with tears, and her voice shook when she spoke. Are you real? She asked. I have dreamed of rescue so many times, and every time I wake up back in this cage. I am real, Marcus promised. And this is not a dream. He helped her to her feet and wrapped his jacket around her thin shoulders. And then he activated his communicator to contact his squad. Change of plans, everyone, he said quietly. We are not just here for supplies anymore. We are burning this whole place down. Sarge, that is insane, Chun responded. We cannot fight an entire station. Watch me, Marcus replied. And there was something in his voice that made his squad stop arguing because they had heard that tone before, was the tone Marcus used when he had decided that something was going to happen no matter what the cost. And it was the tone that had kept him alive for 18 months behind enemy lines. Lyris looked up at the human soldier who had appeared from nowhere to save her. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually see her mother again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me, and you have nothing to gain." Marcus looked at her, and then looked at all the other cages full of broken people. And his jaw tightened with anger. "Because someone has to," he answered simply. "Now stay close to me, princess. Things are about to get very loud." The next 17 hours would become the longest night any of them had ever survived. And Marcus gathered his squad in a dark corner of the station to explain his plan. "We have 15 people against maybe 300 guards and criminals," he began. "Those are bad odds, but we have something they do not have." "What is that, Sarge?" Williams asked. "We are desperate, and we are angry, and we have nothing left to lose," Marcus answered. "That makes us dangerous." He divided his squad into 3 teams and gave each team a specific mission that had to be completed for any of them to survive. Team 1 would find the station's communication array and destroy it so the slavers could not call for help. And Chun would lead that group because he was the best with electronics. Team 2 would locate the fuel storage and rig it to explode on a timer, giving them all a deadline to escape. And Rodriguez would handle that, because she knew more about engineering than anyone else on the ship team. 3 was Marcus himself and 4 volunteers, who would go into the slave pits and free as many prisoners as possible while creating chaos and confusion once the communications are down and the bombs are set. "We have exactly 30 minutes to get back to the Defiant and launch before this whole rock turns into fire," Marcus explained. "Anyone who is not on the ship when we leave gets left behind." His soldiers nodded because they understood. And there was no fear in their eyes, only determination. Lyris stood beside Marcus with her thin hands clenched into fists. And even though she was weak from years of captivity, her spirit burned brighter than ever. "I want to help," she said. "You can help by staying alive and staying close," Marcus told her. "Your mother is waiting for you somewhere out there, and I intend to deliver you to her in one piece." Lyris wanted to argue, but she saw the look in his eyes, and she knew that this human meant every word he said. The team separated and moved through the station, like ghosts, avoiding guards and cameras and all the other dangers that lurked in every. Shadow Chun's team reached the communication array first, and they found it guarded by only 2 bored Cathari, who were playing some kind of card game instead of watching their screens. Quietly, Chun whispered to his team, and they moved like the wind. 2 minutes later, the guards were unconscious, and Chun was working on the communication systems, his fingers flying over alien keyboards as he searched for the right commands. Come on, he muttered under his breath. And then he found what he was looking for and smiled. The communication array went dark with a shower of sparks. And suddenly, Verthek's station was cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Rodriguez's team had a harder time because the fuel storage was deep in the heart of the station and heavily guarded. But Rodriguez had learned some tricks during their 18 months of survival. She created a distraction by triggering a false fire alarm in another section. And when the guards ran to investigate, she slipped inside the fuel chamber with her explosives. This is going to make a very big boom, she said to herself as she attached the charges to the main fuel lines and set the timer for 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Marcus and his team had reached the slave pits, and what they found there made their blood boil with rage. Hundreds of prisoners were locked in cages across multiple levels. Beings from every corner of the galaxy who had been stolen from their homes and families and sold like property. We cannot save them all, Okonkwo said with pain in his voice. There are too many. Then we save as many as we can, Marcus replied. And he started breaking open cages with his rifle butt while shouting orders to the prisoners. Listen to me, everyone. The station is going to explode in 25 minutes, and you need to get to the docking bays and steal ships and fly away as fast as you can. At first, the prisoners just stared at him with empty eyes because hope had been beaten out of them long ago. But then one of them stood up and started helping to free the others, and then another, and another. And soon there was a wave of desperate people surging through the station toward freedom. The guards finally realized something was wrong, and alarms began to blare throughout Vertex as the Cathari mobilized to stop the uprising. Contact. William shouted as a group of guards appeared at the end of a corridor with weapons. Raised Marcus, pushed Lyris behind a metal pillar, and returned fire. And the narrow corridor became a deadly crossfire of plasma bolts and bullets. Private Chun took a hit to the shoulder and went down with a cry of pain. And Marcus dragged him to cover, while Okonkwo lay down suppressing fire. "I am okay, Sarge," Chun gasped through gritted teeth. "Just a scratch." It was not a scratch, but Marcus did not argue because there was no time. And he hauled Chun to his feet and kept moving. The freed prisoners were causing chaos throughout the station, fighting guards with anything they could find. And some of them were dying, but others were escaping, and that was all that mattered. 15 minutes. Rodriguez's voice came through the communicator. "Everyone needs to start heading back now." Marcus checked his ammunition and found he was running low. And Lyris was struggling to keep up because her body was weak from years of starvation and abuse. "Can you run?" he asked her. "I can try," she answered. "Not good enough," Marcus said. And he lifted her onto his back despite her protests. "Hold on tight, princess. This ride is about to get bumpy." They fought their way through corridor after corridor, and every turn brought new enemies and new dangers. Corporal Okonkwo took the rear guard position and held off wave after wave of Cathari guards who were desperate to stop the escaping prisoners. "Go," he shouted to the others. "I will hold them here." "We do not leave people behind," Marcus shouted back. "You are not leaving me." "I am choosing to stay," Okonkwo replied with a fierce grin. "Now get that girl to her mother, Sarge." "That is an order." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew Okonkwo was right. And every second they delayed put everyone else at risk. "You better be on that ship when we launch," Marcus said. "Count on it," Okonkwo answered. And then he turned back to face the enemy alone. The last 5 minutes were a blur of running and shooting and praying. And Marcus burst through the airlock of the Defiant with Lyris still clinging to his back and Chum bleeding all over his uniform. "Everyone on board," Rodriguez shouted from the pilot's seat. "Almost," Marcus gasped. Okonkwo is still out there. The seconds ticked by like hours, and the timer on the bombs counted down toward 0. Then a figure appeared at the end of the docking corridor, running faster than any human should be able to run. And Okonkwo threw himself through the airlock just as the docking clamps released. "Go, go, go," he screamed. And Rodriguez slammed the throttle forward. The Defiant shot away from Vertex Station. And 3 seconds later, the entire asteroid erupted in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space, like a new star being born. Lyris watched the explosion through the rear viewport, and she realized that her cage, her prison, a nightmare of 3 years, was finally gone forever. She started to cry then. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. And Marcus held her and let her weep because she had earned those tears. "You are safe now," he said softly. "I promise you are safe," and for the first time in 3 years, Lyris believed it. The journey to the sorry space would take 4 months. And the Defiant was not designed for comfort or long voyages or carrying alien passengers. Ship was a military frigate built for war, with narrow corridors and hard bunks and recycled air that always tasted slightly of metal and oil, but to Lyris it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. because it was filled with people who had risked everything to save her. And that made every cold corner feel like home. The first few days were difficult because Lyris was weak and sick, and her body had forgotten what real food tasted like. And she spent most of her time sleeping in the medical bay, while Chun recovered from his shoulder wound beside. Marcus checked on her every few hours, bringing her soup and water and sometimes just sitting with her in silence because he understood that she needed time to heal. "Why did you do it?" Lyris asked him one night when the ship was quiet and everyone else was asleep. "You could have died on that station, and you knew the risks. So why did you save me?" Marcus thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I had a little sister once," he said, and his voice was heavy with old pain. "Her name was Emma, and she was taken during a raid on our colony when I was 16. And I never saw her again." Lyris watched his face and saw the grief that still lived behind his eyes. "Even after all these years, I spent years searching for her, following every lead and chasing every rumor. But I never found her," Marcus continued. "And when I saw you in that cage, refusing to break, refusing to give up hope, I saw Emma in your eyes. I am sorry about your sister," Lyris said softly. "Me too," Marcus replied. "But saving you does not bring her back. I know that. I just could not walk away from another lost girl when I had the power to help." They sat in silence after that. But it was a comfortable silence, and Lyris reached out and took his hand in hers. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered. "Not just for saving me, but for telling me the truth. I will never forget what you did." As the days turned into weeks, Lyris began to recover her strength, and she started to explore the ship and meet the rest of the crew. Private Rodriguez taught her how to play poker, and Lyris was terrible at it at first because her face showed every emotion. But she learned quickly, and soon she was winning more hands than she lost. "The princess is a card shark," Rodriguez complained with a smile after losing her third game in a row. "Someone should have warned me." Corporal Okonkwo showed her how to exercise in the small cargo bay that doubled as a gym, and he designed a special training program to help her rebuild the muscles that had wasted away. During her years in captivity, pain is just weakness leaving the body, he told her as she struggled through another set of push-ups. "You survived 3 years in that hellhole, princess. This is nothing. Please stop calling me princess," Lyris gasped between breaths. "My name is Lyris." Okonkwo grinned and helped her to her feet. "All right, Lyris. Now give me 10 more." Private Williams turned out to be an excellent cook, despite the limited supplies on the ship, and he took it as a personal mission to introduce Lyris to human food. She tried pizza and loved it. She tried coffee and hated it. She tried chocolate, and her eyes went wide with wonder. "This is the greatest thing I have ever tasted," she said with chocolate smeared on her face like a child. "Why did no one tell me about this before?" "Chocolate is humanity's greatest invention," Williams agreed. "Some people say it was fire or the wheel, but those people are wrong." Chun, once his shoulder healed, taught Lyris about human technology and how their systems differed from the Sari designs. "Your people use crystal matrices for data storage," he explained while showing her the ship's computer core. "We use silicon chips and magnetic drives." "Same result, but different approach. Which is better?" Lyris asked. "Neither," Chun answered. "Just different, and different is not bad. Different is what makes the galaxy interesting." Lyris found that she liked these humans more and more with every passing day, and she began to understand why her mother had always spoken of humanity with respect, even though their two peoples had never formed an alliance. Humans were strange and loud and sometimes crude, but they were also kind and brave and fiercely loyal to their own, and now Lyris was one of their own, at least for these 4 months. At least on this little ship floating through the stars. One night Marcus found her sitting alone in the observation deck, staring out at the swirling colors of hyperspace as the ship traveled faster than light. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "I am scared," Lyris admitted. And it was the first time she had said those words out loud since the rescue. "Scared of what?" "My mother," Lyris answered. 3 years is a long time, Marcus. I was a child when I was taken, and I am not a child anymore. What if she does not recognize me? What if she does not want me back?" Marcus was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "I do not know your mother," he said, "but I know that she has been searching for you for 3 years without giving up. I know that her entire empire has been looking for you since the day you disappeared." "How do you know that?" Lyris asked. "Because we picked up transmissions when we entered the edge of the sorry space." Marcus explained. "There are still reward postings for information about you. Still search parties combing the outer systems. Still a mother who refuses to believe her daughter is dead." Lyris felt tears forming in her eyes, and she tried to blink them away, but they fell anyway. "A mother always knows her child," Marcus continued. "No matter how much time passes, no matter how much you change, she will know you the moment she sees you." "You really believe that?" Lyris asked. "I do," Marcus answered. "And in a few more weeks you will see for yourself." Lyris leaned against his shoulder, and Marcus put his arm around her, and they watched the stars streak past in silence. The ship flew on through the darkness, carrying a lost princess home to a mother who had never stopped waiting, and carrying 15 human soldiers who had become something more than rescuers. They had become family, and when the day came that Lyris would have to leave them, she knew she would carry them in her heart forever. These strange, brave, wonderful humans who had shown her that hope was never foolish and that kindness could come from the most unexpected places too. Weeks later, the Defiant crossed into the sorry space, and everything changed. The moment the Defiant entered the sorry space, alarms began to blare across 3 sectors. A human warship had crossed the border without authorization, and within minute 40, the Zari cruisers had surrounded the tiny frigate with weapons locked and shields raised. "Unidentified vessel, you have violated the Sari territory," a cold voice announced over the communication channel. "Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed." Marcus stood on the bridge of his battered ship and looked at the massive warships that surrounded them like wolves around a wounded deer. "This is Sergeant Marcus Cole of the Terran Alliance," he responded calmly. "I am requesting emergency audience with Queen Velara. I have her daughter on board." There was a long silence, and Marcus could feel his crew holding their breath as they waited for a response. "Your claim is noted," the voice finally replied. "Remain in position and do not attempt to flee." The communication ended, and for the next 6 hours, the Defiant sat motionless in space while the Zari fleet watched every move they made. Lyris paced back and forth in the corridor, her newly healed body trembling with nervous energy. "What if they do not believe us?" she asked for the 100th time. "What if they think this is some kind of trick? Then we will convince them," Marcus said. "But I need you to stay calm, Princess. We did not come all this way to fail now." Finally, another transmission came through, and this time the voice was different, commanding and regal, but with an undertone of desperate hope. "This is Queen Velara," the voice said. "I am told you claim to have my daughter. Prove it." Marcus looked at Lyris and nodded, and she stepped forward to the communication panel with tears already forming in her eyes. "Mother," she said, and her voice cracked on that single word. "Mother, it is me. It is Lyris. I am alive." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like forever. "Lyris." The Queen's voice came back, and all the royal composure had vanished, replaced by raw emotion. "My child, is that really you?" "Yes, Mother. A human soldier saved me from the slavers. He destroyed their station and brought me home," Lyris sobbed. I'm sorry I was gone so long. I tried to be strong. I tried to make you proud. You will dock with my flagship immediately, the Queen commanded. But her voice was shaking now. I need to see you with my own eyes. The Thesari fleet parted to allow the Defiant through, and Marcus guided his ship toward the massive, royal flagship that waited at the center of the formation. The docking procedure was quick. And when the airlock opened, Marcus saw a corridor lined with royal guards in gleaming armor, all of them staring at the ragged humans with suspicion and confusion. Stay behind me, Marcus told his crew, and he walked forward unarmed with his hands visible. The guards led them through the ship to a massive hangar bay where more soldiers had gathered. And at the far end of the hangar stood a figure in flowing robes of silver and violet queen. Velara looked exactly as the pictures had shown her, tall and elegant with skin that glowed like a living jewel. But her eyes were fixed on the humans with an intensity that could have burned through steel. Where is she? The Queen demanded, and her voice echoed through the silent hangar. Marcus stepped aside, and Lyris walked forward into the light. She was thin and scarred, and her skin had not fully recovered its glow. But she stood straight and proud like the princess she was. For a moment, mother and daughter just stared at each other across the hangar, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Lyris spoke one word, one simple word that carried the weight of 3 years of suffering and hope. Mom. Her voice broke on the word, and tears began streaming down her face. Mom, I am back. Queen Velara moved, and it was not the graceful glide of a queen, but the desperate run of a mother who had finally found her lost child. They collided in the middle of the hangar, and the queen fell to her knees as she pulled her daughter into her arms. My baby, Velara sobbed, all pretense of royal composure forgotten. My sweet child, you are alive. You are here. He saved me, Lyris cried into her mother's shoulder. The human, he saved me when no one else could. They held each other and wept, and the guards who watched felt their own eyes growing wet, because this was not a political moment or a diplomatic event. This was a mother and daughter reunited after 3 years of despair. And it was the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. Finally, Queen Velara rose to her feet, still holding her daughter's hand as if afraid to let go. And she turned to face Marcus Cole. The human sergeant stood at attention despite his exhaustion, his uniform more patched than fabric, and his face lined with scars from 100 battles. You, the Queen said, and she walked toward him with Lyris beside her. You did what my entire empire could not do. You brought my daughter home. I just did what anyone would do, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. No, Velara shook her head. You did what no one else was willing to do. You risked your life and the lives of your soldiers for a girl you did not know, from a people you had never met, with no hope of reward. She stopped in front of him and looked into his eyes, searching for something. Why? She asked. And it was the same question Lyris had asked months ago. Marcus thought about Emma, about the sister he had lost and could never save. And he thought about Lyris, about the princess he had found by accident and saved by choice, because she did not give up. He answered. 3 years in that cage, and she never stopped fighting, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someone would come for her. He paused and swallowed hard. I lost someone once, someone I could not save. And when I saw your daughter, I knew the universe was giving me a chance to do better. Queen Velara studied him for a long moment, and then she did something that made every guard in the hangar gasp with shock. She bowed her head to a human sergeant. The Thesari Empire owes you a debt that can never be repaid, she said. Name any price, ask for anything within my power to give, and it is yours. Marcus looked at his squad, at the 15 soldiers who had followed him through hell and back, who had trusted him with their lives for 18 months. My people have been lost for a long time, Your Majesty, he said. We just want to go home. The Queen smiled. And for the first time in 3 years, her skin began to glow with its full radiant light. "Then I will personally escort you there," she declared. "And I will ensure that your people know exactly what you have done." 3 weeks later, a Dasari fleet arrived at Earth, and the entire planet watched in amazement as 40 alien warships delivered a single battered human frigate to its home. Sergeant Marcus Cole and his squad were welcomed as heroes, and the story of their rescue spread across the galaxy like fire. But the greater change happened in the years that followed. When the Dasari Empire and the Terran Alliance signed a treaty of eternal friendship, humans do not ask if a life is worth saving before they save it, Queen Valara said in her address to the Galactic Council. They simply act, and they ask for nothing in return. Such beings are rare in this universe, and we intend to stand beside them. Years later, Princess Lyris became an ambassador to Earth, and she spent her life building bridges between humans and the Saurian. Her desk, she kept a photograph of a tired human soldier carrying a broken alien girl through fire, and beneath it she had written her own words. "Some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be honored." And somewhere on Earth, Marcus Cole looked up at the stars and smiled, because he knew that Emma would have been proud. The universe was vast and often cruel, but sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys won, and that was enough.